Okay, chapter 27. Mike TV is sent by television. So remember in chapter 26, hopefully you listened to that one. That was about being able to send the chocolate bar through the television. So now Mike TV is going to be sent by television. Mike TV was even more excited than Grandpa Joe at seeing a bar of chocolate being sent by television. But Mr. Wonka, he shouted, can you send other things through the air at the same time? Breakfast cereal, for instance? Oh, my sainted aunt, cried Mr. Wonka. Don't mention the disgusting stuff in front of me. Do you know what breakfast cereal is made of? It's made of all those little curly wood shavings you find in the pencil sharpener. But could you send it by television if you wanted to, as you do chocolate? Asked Mike TV. Of course I could. And what about people? Asked Mike TV. Could you send a real-life person from one place to another the same way? A person? Cried Mr. Wonka. Are you off your rocker? But it could be done. Good heavens, child, I don't know. I suppose it could. Yes, I'm pretty sure it could. Of course it could. I wouldn't want to risk it, though. It might have some nasty results. But Mike TV was already off and running. The moment he heard Mr. Wonka say, I'm pretty sure it could, he was running as fast as he could towards the other end of the room where the great camera was standing. Look at me, he shouted as he ran. I'm going to be the first person in the world to be sent by television. No, 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 said Mr. Wonka. Mike, screamed Mrs. TV. Stop, come back. You'll be turned into a million little pieces. But there was no stopping Mike TV now. The boy rushed on, and when he reached the enormous camera, he jumped straight for the switch, scattering Oompa Loompas right and left as he went. See you later, alligator, he shouted, and he pulled down the switch. And as he did so, he leaped out into the full glare of the mighty lens. There was a blinding flash. Then there was silence. Then Mrs. TV ran forward, but she stopped dead in the middle of the room, and she stood there. She stood staring at the place where her own son had been, and her great red mouth opened wide, and she screamed, He's gone! He's gone! Great heavens, he has gone, shouted Mr. TV. Mr. Wonka hurried forward and placed a hand gently on Mrs. TV's shoulder. We shall have to hope for the best, he said. You must pray that your little boy will come out unharmed at the other end. Mike, screamed Mrs. TV, clapping her hands over her head. Where are you? I'll tell you where he is, Mr. TV said. He's whizzing around above our heads in a million little pieces. Don't talk about it, said Mrs. TV. We must watch the television set, said Mr. Wonka. He may come through any moment. Mr. and Mrs. TV and Grandpa Joe and little Charlie and Mr. Wonka all gathered around the television and stared tensely at the screen. The screen was quite blank. He's taking a heck of a long time to come across, said Mr. TV. Oh, dear, dear, said Mr. Wonka. I do hope that no part of him gets left behind. What on earth do you mean? Asked Mr. TV sharply. I don't wish to alarm you, said Mr. Wonka, but it does sometimes happen that only half the little pieces find their way into the television set. It happened last week. I don't know why, but the result was only half a bar of chocolate came through. Mr. TV let out a scream of horror. You mean only half of Mike is coming back to us? Let's hope it's the top half, said Mr. TV. Hold everything, said Mr. Wonka. Watch the screen. Something's happening. The screen had suddenly begun to flicker. Then some wavy lines appeared. Mr. Wonka adjusted one of the knobs and the wavy lines went away. And now, very slowly, the screen began to get brighter and brighter. Here he comes, yelled Mr. Wonka. Yes, that's him, all right. Is he all in one piece, said Mr. TV. Mrs. TV, I'm not sure, said Mr. Wonka. It's too early to tell. Faintly at first, but becoming clearer and clearer every second, the picture of Mike TV appeared on the screen. He was standing up and waving at the audience and grinning from ear to ear. But he's a midget, shouted Mr. TV. Mike, cried Mrs. TV, are you all right? Are there any bits of you missing? Isn't he going to get bigger? Shouted Mr. TV. Talk to me, Mike, cried Mrs. TV. Say something. Tell me you're all right. A tiny little voice, no louder than a squeaking of a mouse, came out of the television set. Hi, Mom, it said. Hi, Pop, look at me. I'm the first person ever to be sent by television. Grab him, ordered Mr. Wonka. Quick. Mrs. TV shot out a hand and picked the tiny figure of Mike TV out of the screen. There she is, holding Mike. Hooray, cried Mr. Wonka. He's all in one piece. He's completely unharmed. You call that unharmed, said Mrs. TV, peeking at the little speck of a boy who was now running to and fro in the palm of her hand, waving his pistols in the air. He was certainly not more than an inch tall. He shrunk, said Mr. TV. Of course he shrunk, said Mr. Wonka. What did you expect? This is terrible, wailed Mrs. TV. What are you going to do? And Mr. TV said, we can't send him back to school like this. He'll get trod upon. He'll get squashed. He won't be able to do anything, cried Mrs. TV. Oh, yes, I will, squeaked the tiny voice of Mike TV. I'll still be able to watch television. Never again, shouted Mr. TV. I'm throwing the television set right out the window the moment we get home. I've had enough of television. When he heard this, Mike TV flew into a terrible tantrum. He started jumping up and down in the palm of his mother's hand, screaming and yelling and trying to bite her finger. I want to watch television, he squeaked. I want to watch television. I want to watch television. I want to watch television. Here, give him to me, said Mr. TV. He took the tiny boy and shoved him in the breast pocket of his jacket and stuffed a handkerchief on top of him. Squeals and yells came from inside the pocket, and the pocket shook as a furious little prisoner fought to get out. Oh, Mr. Wonka, wailed Mrs. TV. How can we make him grow? Well, said Mr. Wonka, I must say that's a wee bit tricky. But small boys are extremely springy and classic. They stretch like mad. So what we'll do, we'll put him in a special machine I have for testing the stretchiness of chewing gum. Maybe that will bring him back to where he was. Oh, thank you, said Mrs. TV. Don't mention it, dear lady. How far do you think he'll stretch? Asked Mr. TV. Maybe miles, said Mr. Wonka. Who knows? But he's going to be awfully thin. Everything gets thinner when it gets stretched. You mean like chewing gum, said Mr. TV. Exactly. How thin will he be, said Mrs. TV anxiously. I haven't the foggiest idea, said Mr. Wonka. And it doesn't really matter anyway, because we'll soon fatten him up. All he'll have to do is give triple overdose of my wonderful super vitamin candy. Super vitamin candy contains huge amounts of vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, G, vitamin I, vitamin J, vitamin K, vitamin L, vitamin M, vitamin N, vitamin O, vitamin P. Vitamin Q, vitamin R, vitamin T, vitamin U, vitamin V, vitamin W, vitamin X, vitamin Y, and, believe it or not, vitamin Z. The only two vitamins it doesn't have are vitamin S because it makes you sick and vitamin H because it makes you grow horns out of the top of your head like a bull. But it does have a very small amount of the rarest and most magical vitamin of all, vitamin Wonka. And what will that do to him, asked Mr. TV. It will make his toes grow out until they're as long as his fingers. Oh, no, said Mrs. TV. Don't be silly. It's the most useful, and he'll be able to play the piano with his feet. But Mr. Wonka, no argument, said Mr. Wonka. He turned away and clicked his fingers 3 times. Oompa Loompas appeared immediately and stood beside him. Follow these orders, said Mr. Wonka, handing the Oompa Loompas a piece of paper on which he had written full instructions, and you'll find the boy in his father's pocket. Off you go. Goodbye, Mr. TV. Goodbye, Mrs. TV. And please don't look so worried. They all come out in the wash, you know, every one of them. At the end of the room, the Oompa Loompas around the giant camera were already beating their tiny drums and beginning to jog up and down to the rhythm. There they go again, said Mr. Wonka. I'm afraid you can't stop their singing. Little Charlie caught Grandpa Joe's hand, and the two of them stood beside Mr. Wonka in the middle of the long, bright room, listening to the Oompa Loompas. And this is what they sang. Okay, I'm running out of battery, so I'm going to stop it, and then I'll record the song. Okay, love you.